Arsenal actually play Seville tomorrow night, Simon, in the Champions League. I might end up at that myself. But before that, we're going to be hearing from Mikel Arteta. In fact, Mikel Arteta is speaking in the next few moments. In fact, he's about to speak right now. Now, what we'll do is, obviously, he is bound to be asked about that rant following that goal in that game at Newcastle on Saturday evening. We'll see where he's at with that, and if there's any doubling down from him on that one.
Well, he's going to double down. He's been fully supported by his football club. His ultimate employers, Arsenal, have accepted his observations, concurred with it, and ultimately free-line whipped it. So he's got nobody to worry about.
Yeah. And
quite frankly, if you're going to say something, stand by it. So I don't think he's going to be bothered about it. The problem is how you frame this argument with Arteta. Does every football manager have a right to call for the high standards in refereeing? Yes. Should poor standards be called out? Yes. Why are we on a VAR journey? Because they couldn't accept what was on the field decisions. What's happening with VAR? It's compounding the problem because VAR is making issues, and ultimately the characterisation of VAR was it's the ultimate panacea. And none of these things are correct. And the problem is that they'll go around this argument. Do facts trump sentiment? Is it a fact that VAR has made things worse in terms of outcomes? Is it a fact that our refereeing standards in this country have diminished and actually our refereeing standards by a comparison to other leagues around the world is poor? If those are facts, then no one should touch Arteta because he's trotted out facts. If they're not facts, which I would venture to you that they're probably not, then what happens with sentiment? It supersedes fact in the world that we live in. Of course it doesn't. VAR, despite the fact I'm getting irritated with it now, as an advocate for it, I'm going, come on now, we can't take 2.5 minutes. Come on now. There is a process where this was brought in to aid and abet, not to enhance the criticism. And there needs to be another generation. And perhaps we need to go fully automated. Perhaps we need to stop the argument and take away any debate about what human intervention there should be and automate it to the absolute point where there's very little human interaction, because even then they'll start and find something to complain about. The problem is that there is no acceptance of error. And people will say, and football fans are right to say it, well, why should you price in a net refereeing error? Nobody's making a referee, nobody's challenging a referee, nobody's tackling a referee. Well, they are actually, because players have developed an ability to be able to con and misrepresent and simulate. So the referees are not only refereeing the circumstances in front of them, they're refereeing by Postecoglou, the best person in this conversation's own admission, manager's predisposition to finding a way around the rules. There's your argument in its most pure form. Yeah. Postecoglou, who's the most palatable face of the conversation right now, is by definition admitting that referees are in a very difficult position because even the best managers are trying to find a way to make their lives more difficult.
But your solution to this is to go the full hog. Take the entire human element out of the technology procedure and add more technical.
Well, what is this? Some demented version of the hokey cokey?
You're saying go full AI.
I'm saying that in order to be able to overcome the ridiculous narrative and characterisation that sports refereeing will involve decisions that are fundamentally wrong and people make big errors at times, you're going to have to eliminate it. And that means, why not? If you're going to make it about drawing lines, if you're going to make it about offsides by the end of someone's fingernail, then you're going to have to bring in technology that's able to improve. We've got to start changing the rules. Stop changing the rules. The rules have got to fit the game rather than the game fitting the rules.
Right.
And they've got it arse about face. And I've always maintained that the digital technology was brought in to aid and abet referees, not to be a default setting. Yeah. I've always maintained that referees should be able to call for digital rather than having it as a default setting. It was one of the things that I felt that referees needed to help them with the evolution of 24-hour broadcasting that has 360-degree scrutiny and the backlash of referees making decisions that they could then be scrutinised afterwards by the very nature of the broadcasting mediums that we now have that have benefited football so much. Yeah. So digital technology is the blunt instrument to whack officialdom and say it's gotten worse. But there's no. We sit here and people say it's an advancing a narrative. I don't give it monkeys if it was Arteta that said it yesterday, or if it was Roy Hodgson, or if it's somebody I like Ange Postecoglou, right, that came out and said what Arteta had said. I would still say you've stepped over the line. You don't get to say that. You don't get to have a broadside, a State of the Nations, where you pretty much eviscerate and dismantle the entire refereeing fraternity in this country by one sweeping statement. And of course, those that are in the Arteta camp will turn around and say, well, someone's got to say it. And by the way, the decisions are appalling. But they don't stump it, they don't stand it up. Because when we sit here and we say, well, the statistics that have been borne out have actually shown an improvement, they'll turn around and say, well, they're the statistics that have been produced by the PGMOL. And of course they're going to say that. So you can never win the argument against people that either want to see it the way they want to see it. The bottom line is, is if we are fundamentally so far behind the curve with refereeing standards in world football, then we need to do something about it.
Absolutely. But you don't think it can be pared back somewhat? I mean, look at what happened last night. Because of technology, first half at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 56 minutes. The second half at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 55 minutes.
But these are, again, look at the context. The digital has opened up a whole Pandora's box of problems.
Is that too much interference, though?
Well, I think you've got to get to the point quicker. It's like being a driver of a car and a police officer. When you're a high-speed driver, you can drive at high speed. You should be able to attend to things in order. But also, this digital technology has opened up a dynamic that was never there before. All of a sudden, you're considering 3 different things in isolation because all of a sudden it gives you that landscape to be able to achieve it. Now we're considering whether it was a goal, whether it was an offside, whether it was a handball, whether it was a penalty. I'm willing to wager you if it was an on-field decision, it would have been the first one that was considered, not all the other 3. And that's the Pandora's box that you've opened. So if you've opened it, how do you wind it back? How do you stick this genie back in a bottle? Because the reasons why we're here is clear. Because no one would shut up about the mistakes that were being made or issues that were had with the nature of the way that football's progressed. Nobody would own the reasons why. The reasons why we've now got extra minutes, not just because of VAR, it's because players simulate and cheat and waste time. But they've got the audacity to sit there and go, we feel a bit tired and the games are going on until 9:30. And why is that? And when you look at it and you actually boil it down, you actually want to put your head in your hands and going, what is this? The blind leading the deaf.
Oh, I know. So Mikel Arteta, he was asked about that. He's just been speaking in the build-up to Arsenal's European tie against Seville. And he was asked about that rant following the defeat at Newcastle on Saturday evening and the Anthony Gordon goal, of course, that he feels should not have stood. This was Arteta moments ago.
It is my duty to stand in front of you, to stand in front of the cameras and give a very clear and honest assessment of what happened on the game. And this is what I did, reflect very openly how I felt that the team played and how the game was conditioned by these results with the decisions that were made. And it's the duty. My duty is to be defending my players, supporting my club, defending my people in the best possible way, and this is what I'm going to do time after time. And I do it not the way I feel, with the evidence and being as clear as possible. And I always do it. When we play, really need to say that. When we have lost, to take my responsibility, the first one me, to do it. And it's the way that I am, and I have to defend my club.
He's got to defend his club. So he sees it purely from an Arsenal viewpoint.
Yeah, and
he's made no bones about that.
Yeah, but
my duty is to defend my players and my club.
Yeah, but his duty...
I mean, that's blinkered, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it kind of is. But then again, by the same token, you know, Ange Postecoglou has asked Premier League managers to do their job and manage their football clubs, right? And that's what he's doing. But he didn't do that. That's not what he did. What he did was he gave a State of Nations on how refereeing standards in this country had dropped to such a level we'd been over 20 years. I'm going to allow him dispensation for his language barriers because the word duty, and it seems to imply that he's doing something for everybody and that ultimately he's performing a function that's far more compelling. No, what you did was your team played poorly, they got a bad decision, you had plenty of time to overturn that result, you weren't good enough, your team weren't good enough, and you're going to centre on one instance. And you're going to make it all about that. And I understand it. Don't get me wrong. These guys are in a very difficult position as football managers. They get paid handsomely for being in it. But notwithstanding it...
Why are they in a difficult position? I don't get that.
Because look, they're in the They're in the eye of a storm. You can't
do it.
You can't expect everybody else... A business that thrives on emotion... Because this lunacy of football makes no sense, does it? You grown men cheering for 17-year-old kids on a pitch, singing their names and whatever else. So the whole game is steeped in emotion. You can't then expect, in every instance, a manager not to embody that emotion, especially a young manager that's trying to build a football club, straining against the opposition and straining against the 250 million quid that he's been allowed to spend to build a team that now has to win the league, because most people think they bottled it last year. Right? Yeah. So all of that comes into play. And do I think it's an excuse? No, I think it's background. It gives you some explanation. It's not an excuse. So I understand it.
But should we not be hearing even...
I think it should be better.
An ounce of contrition?
No.
That maybe he went too far?
No, because he either meant it or he didn't. And
that's the problem, isn't it? For the PGMOL.
No, I don't like it.
I don't
like it. I don't like what he said. I think he stepped over the line. But what do you respect? People that say what they mean and mean what they say, or people that are prepared to go, well, I don't feel actually any contrition, but I'm going to say it.
Someone that's crossed the line, to recognise the fact he crossed the line, and we were in agreement yesterday that he had.
But you're right. Well, that's our view, right? And we're asking for the impossible. You're asking for objectivity. You're asking football managers to be circumspect. You're asking them to step outside of a bubble, which is not a bubble. It's like the size of bleeding centre parks in terms of the arrogance inside the industry, and sit there and go, maybe I've got it slightly wrong. He believes, and I admire him for it. If he believes what he said is right, then own it and stick with it. Too many people say something, and when it gets a bit hot in the kitchen, they go, no, I don't fancy that. You say something, and if you meant it, and you stand by it in a cold light of day, then you take the consequences that come with it.
But what he's saying is, I saw it, and what I saw, I stand by, but he's only standing by the Arsenal version of what he saw on Saturday night.
Well, he's not going to stand by the Newcastle version, is he?
But why not be more objective, pragmatic, and slightly apologetic, knowing Arteta knows that he pushed it to the limit, probably right across the line. He does, he must.
But I tell you why he doesn't.
Of course he does.
But I tell you why he doesn't. Because the people that ultimately employed him told him he didn't. The people that have a greater degree of objectivity, that are supposed to be, at times, not all the time, the grown-ups in the room that actually take emotion out of a situation and go, let's look at the bigger picture in the great scheme of things, what we're trying to achieve. They didn't do that. What they did was they pandered to their manager and went, chapeau, say some more.
Yeah. So he stands by it all this morning. I still put the question to you, should he and Arsenal then be punished for it?
Yes.
And his club. And his club.
Yes. I actually think that what the punishment is incidental, right? Because a touchline ban's laughable, isn't it? A touchline ban, they're up in a stadium on the phone telling them what to do, right? And we've seen Jose Mourinho get smuggled in a laundry basket, right? So it's ridiculous. A fine, nobody cares because Arsenal Football Club are going to pay it on his behalf. Yeah. And it's going to be a drop in the ocean. A drop of vodka in a bath. Nobody gets drunk from that. The point is that the bottom line is that he has said something that needs to have a far greater reaction from those in authority that condemn it if they think it's worth condemning. They're going to find a way out of this, the FA, because first of all, do you seriously expect the FA to actually do anything properly?
Well, he's basically saying what Mourinho said after the Europa League final, that Seville won. I will never recognise that Seville won that final.
Yeah.
Arteta's basically saying this morning, I will never recognise that Newcastle won 1-0 on Saturday
What did you get
evening.
Mourinho, who I happen to really like Jose Mourinho. I have always admired him, and I don't care what other people say about him, right? But then you get Mourinho down in a car park, physically intimidating or trying to verbally abuse a referee.
You can't like that.
No, you can't, but that's the natural extension. That's why the Martin Cassidys of the world exist, to point this out, because whilst I don't want to appear like a referee apologist or a PGMOL apologist, and whilst I'm the last person to want to be bound by an establishment or governance, because I think half the time the people that enforce the rules are the most lily-livered of the lot, or put the frameworks in place. But if you don't have governance, and if you don't have instruction, and you don't have respect, you have anarchy.
Yeah.
And that's what the players and managers want. They want it how they want, when they want, how they want, and they've got all the excuses built in. What a wonderful life to have.
Exactly, and we can't support that.
No.
We can't back that
No, we can't.
any time of the day or night. Arteta stands by what he said on Saturday. We're talking about the fallout, of course, from the weekend to that goal that stood between Newcastle United and Arsenal, that set Arteta off on a major rant, that he was so bitter about it, so uptight about it, so annoyed about it, he felt sick, and he's doubled down on that this morning, speaking ahead of the game against Seville. And Simon's right, he's doubled down on it. In other words, he totally endorses what he said on Saturday, because his own club, Arsenal, back him. So what punishment would fit the crime? What would be appropriate if he was to end up facing some kind of punishment, Simon? You're absolutely right about that. There's a good message, though, Simon, coming in. There's Dan, there's Harry, there's Jamie, and they're all asking the same question. We talk about impossible jobs in football management. The impossible job. Who would be a manager in the Premier League? Oh, geez, the wages would entice many.
Yeah. Is
the really impossible job not the one that Howard Webb has right now at the PGMOL? Yeah. There's the impossible job they're all asking me to ask you this morning.
But it was always going to be us, because he is now trying to make an omelette, and he's going to have to break some eggs. He's trying to unpick a culture that, in part, he and his fraternity were allowed to create. They allowed it. Some of the inadequacies, some of the incompetencies that they have to answer to are not beyond answering. And it's not tribalistic. People make out like this is some sort of attack on Arteta. It doesn't matter who it was that said what he said on the weekend. I couldn't care less if it was a manager of my favourite football team. I would have said the same thing. And people, what they do is they reduce the argument to its lowest denominator, which is it's tribalism. It's got nothing to do with tribalism. Does he have the right to say the things that he said? And were the things that he said accurate in the broader terms? And I would suggest to you that there's an element of managers have a right to answer an honest question in the way that they best see fit. There's a right to opine upon things that they have an opinion on. When they start to globalise it and turn it into things that they can't possibly know as a weapon to either distract or to highlight the individual point that they're making, then they must face the consequences for it. The challenge in this situation is 50% of the argument they don't like VAR and believe it's destroying certain aspects of the game will be on the side of Arteta for this. And then you're in a territory where if you sanction him, whatever the sanction is, none of it means anything to him, and none of it means anything to the football club. You will, for want of a better expression, you'll turn him into a martyr. In football terms, he'll be martyred as a result of somebody that had the courage to say what we're all thinking. And we're all thinking that ultimately VAR is a pile of crap, when actually the reality of it is that the facts don't always bear out those sentiments. And could VAR be much better? Should it be better? Yes, it should. Should the referees evolve? Yes. Are we on the first or second generation of VAR? Was it brought in for a reason? If we reverse out of it and go back to what we had before, is that better? No, none of the above. So the reason is that we've got to find the solution, which I personally believe means now you move into a territory of automation. But Arteta, people are saying this witch hunt for Arteta. Unfortunately, when you make these kind of sweeping observations that engages an audience, that you're entitled to your own opinion, then people on talk shows are going to have their opinion on it. Yeah, of course. And I'm going to stand my argument up, and I defy anybody to debunk the argument that Arteta has the right to say things in the way that he said.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.